Hello everyone. Today we're doing the BattleBots World Championship 4 ranking. We did World Championship 3 last time, so yeah, we're moving along. Um, so we have way more unranked bots this time. So there were a total of 68 bots this season, while there were 55 last season. And there were 6 unranked bots last season. There are 10 this time. Unranked bots because they were not in any televised fights this season. So yeah, I'm only counting televised fights because those are the ones I'm actually able to watch. Uh, so yeah, there'll be two that you might recognize from the last video: the Four Horsemen and Double Jeopardy. The Four Horsemen had 4 bots that they chose 3 out of for each round, but they only used 3 of them in the televised fights. In this one, they had 6 total bots that they picked 3 out of, but I, they weren't in any televised fights, so I couldn't tell which ones they used or not. And Double Jeopardy was an interesting like cannon projectile like firing bot. This time it had 2 shots instead of 1, at least from what I've read. But yeah, a few other bots here too. So yeah, let's get to the actual ranking. 58, Nelly the Ellybot. Um, it's less terrible than the worst ranking bot in the last one, but still really weak. This hammer does basically nothing. It lost to these two, which these two are pretty good, so I get it, but it just was bad. Jasper, a really weak hammer, had a lifter as well, but it didn't do anything. It lost to huge. So yeah, axe backwards. Again, well, this one was returning unlike the previous two. This one was in the last season, and it still sucks this season. Gemini, they're back, and they're basically the exact same as the previous season. And they lost the only televised fight they were in. Breaker Box, lowest ranked bot in this list to win a fight. They're basically just they're a lifter. That's it. No real way to deal damage. Just push things around. P1, another lifter. Um, except I read that it had like it was like an interesting like different kind of lifter, but I didn't get to see it in action because it wasn't able to do anything against SubZero because SubZero won the low ground. So yeah. Oh my. What is going on? Sorry, the PowerPoint keeps glitching out. Okay, free shipping. Free shipping was not as good this season as they were last season. I don't think this lifter design is as good as the previous season's lifter design. Duck. Duck still refuses to die in most of its fights, but it still has no way to deal damage either. Gruff, a new lifter, uh, with a really powerful flamethrower, which is what puts it above the previous lifters. In fact, it's like the most powerful flamethrower in BattleBots history, but it's still a flamethrower, so it's not that useful. Ragnarök, a hammer, except it's an axe this time. The problem is it didn't work properly. Mad Catter, another hammer, except it barely used it against Railgun Max because it just didn't work, so yeah. Sidewinder, I'm sure it'd be higher if it didn't get its weapon taken out immediately. So, yeah. What is PowerPoint? I swear to God. Okay, Petunia. They're back, and they were only in one fight, and they lost. Shellshock, a shell spinner, and a really weak one. Except they also went up against one of the best bots here, so yeah, I can't be too disappointed that they lost. Captain Shrederator. They did not have this design this season. This is just what it shows for this season on the wiki. They went instead. It was more like it wasn't conical at all. It was like completely like the sides were perpendicular to the ground. But I couldn't find any good images of that anywhere. Nor could I find any good like videos of it online. So I just had to go with what they went on the wiki. But it was awful this season. It lost all of its fights. Ribbot, a new one, a pretty weak vertical spinner. They did beat Endgame though. They also had a horizontal spinner configuration, and that's what they showed with on the wiki. So I had to find a separate image for the vertical configuration. They didn't use the horizontal configuration at all in either of these two fights. SubZero, they're a lot better this season than they were last season. They actually did something this time. Lucky. They're back, and basically the same as last time. They lost both their fights, though. Falcon. Honestly, if it weren't for its internal issues, it would probably be higher. It had internal issues, but it had two powerful weapons as well. There's a spinner here and a spinner here. So yeah. Chronos, a ring spinner. They actually beat Copperhead, which was nice, but there was only one fight, so we didn't get to see too much of it. Plus, the only full body spinner like this that I've seen be super successful is Son of Waiachi, which we'll get to later. Huge. They're back and basically the same as before. They had a pretty good record this season, though. Bombshell. They were pretty good last season, but they were not good this season. They downgraded a lot, and I don't know why. Yeah, they lost all of their fights. Granted, they were again. Actually, no. Looking at these fights, they lost to Duck. That's just embarrassing. How did they get knocked out by Duck? I don't even remember. Wanhu. So yeah, this was one of the two Chinese bots that competed in this season, and this one did not impress me. Did beat Captain Shrederator and Mammoth though. Mammoth, speaking of, is absolutely gigantic bot, the biggest one in BattleBots history, as far as I'm aware. Its weapon doesn't really do damage, but it can literally throw other bots out of the arena, which is really cool. They use that to win against Axe Backwards. Gigabyte. Yeah, they didn't do as well this season as they did last season. Still better than Captain Shrederator, though. And they beat Minotaur, but that's because Minotaur's weapon wasn't working. Tantrum, they're back and a lot better. Instead of being a weak flipper, they have this like spinner thing on a puncher. And that's a design they would definitely upgrade in later seasons. And they're going to keep climbing up the ranks. As for this season, I mean, they beat Gemini, but lost to the other two bots they fought. Shatter. They'll be recurring for later seasons. They didn't do well this season, though, because their hammer was really unreliable. But they'll be going up the ranks in later on. Blacksmith, they're back. I don't really think they're as good this season as they were last season. They just didn't seem as powerful. But they did do reasonably well. Texas Twister. Basically take half of Rotator and make it its own bot and give it a Texas theme. They did beat Black Dragon, but I personally think that the judge decision should have gone to Black Dragon in that fight. Rotator, speaking of, they beat Tombstone again. Otherwise, they lost to these three. Yeah. Valkyrie. Take the other half of Rotator and make it its own bot. They beat Monsoon, though, which was nice. Kraken, they were much improved this season compared to last season. They beat Ribbot. They actually completely obliterated Ribbot. Then lost to Blacksmith and Son of Waiachi, which, to be fair, what's a Crusher going to do against Son of Waiachi? That just doesn't seem possible. Rainbow, they were only in 2 fights. They lost to Yeti because their weapon wouldn't spin up fast enough, and they beat Nelly the Ellybot because Nelly the Ellybot couldn't do anything to it. Overall, they're okay. It's the first I've seen so far, at least chronologically, of the type of bot that I refer to as a budget tombstone, and there are definitely going to be a few more of these. Quantum, another new Crusher. This one has an absolutely epic design. I love this thing. And it did pretty well as well. It beat Blacksmith and Valkyrie, and it actually made it to the top 16 as well. Warhawk, they're back, and basically the exact same as before, so not much else to say. Copperhead, another new one. They're going to be recurring for a while. They beat Gruff and Warhawk. Bloodsport, they're going to be recurring and also much better in future seasons, but they're still pretty good this season, even though they only won against 2 weaker bots. But yeah, they're also part of the only 3-way fight that was televised this season, and they lost. Skorpios, they're back, and they actually put a proper spinner on there instead of a saw, so they were better this season than they were last season. SawBlaze. Take what I said about Skorpios and apply it to SawBlaze. Whiplash. Whiplash is still Whiplash, and they're still good. They also did well this season, made it to top 8, and then lost to Tombstone, because in fact they lost to Tombstone in basically the same way they lost to Tombstone last season. Lockjaw. Again, they did really well this season. They weren't in the Desperado tournament this time, but they still made it to the top 16. I think they made it to the top 8 this time. They made it to the top 4 last season. Monsoon. Their record wasn't that impressive this season, but they're still Monsoon and still really powerful. And plus, I don't blame them for losing against Hypershock and Bite Force, because those two are just crazy. Black Dragon, another new one. They're going to be recurring for a while, and they're really good. They beat a lot of bots this season. Railgun Max, the other Chinese bot, and this one is really good. Beat these 3 in spectacular fashion, at least in the case of the first 2. Both weapons stopped working in their fight against Wanhu, so it was just a pushing match. They lost to free shipping, although I think the judge decision should have gone to Railgun Max, and they lost the 3-way fight. Cobalt. Another new one with a really powerful spinner at the top. They're going to be back in more seasons. They lost to Duck. I forgot how. They beat SubZero and Bombshell. Yeah. Death Roll. They did really well this season. They were in Season 2, but I wasn't able to watch that season because I just couldn't find it on TV. But yeah, they're back for this season. They'll be back for later seasons. Actually, I think the only season they're in after this is 7, but we'll get there eventually. Yeah, really powerful spinner. They beat Endgame, they beat Yeti, they beat Minotaur, and then they lost to Witch Doctor in the top 4. Speaking of Yeti, they're back and still really powerful. And they made it to the top 16. Yeah, 16. Minotaur. They were an interesting case this season. They tried a new weapon thing. It did not work at all in their first 2 fights. But then, by the time of the Desperado tournament, it did work, and they beat Lucky in Endgame with it. And then they lost to Black Dragon, and then they beat Shatter to get into, and Cobalt to get in the top 16, and then beat Hydra to get into the top 8. So yeah, they did really well. Hypershock. Oh boy. Hypershock was much improved this season compared to last season. They beat Valkyrie. They demolished Monsoon. They literally ripped Monsoon's weapon out of its socket. They lost to Bite Force, but they came closer to beating them than I've ever seen anyone else do. And then they beat Breaker Box. It wasn't even close. They completely annihilated them. And then they lost to Huge and did not make it to the top 16. Bronco. They lost. They won none of their fights, but they're still Bronco and still a really powerful flipper, so I gotta put them up here. But they did get dethroned by another flipper that we'll get to later. Uppercut. A new, very powerful vertical spinner. They beat Mammoth and Breakerbox and Skorpios, and they won the 3-way fight to get into the top 16 before fighting by force and losing. Witch Doctor. They're back, and they're going to be back for basically every season going forward, and they're going to be super strong for every season going forward. They beat everyone until the finals, where they lost to Bite Force. Yeah, Bite Force won the whole thing again, just like last season. Endgame. They didn't do too well this season, but their weapon was definitely stronger than it was last season. They were absolutely destroying Death Roll before they just stopped working. So, yeah. They also destroyed Gruff and Cobalt, too. Deep 6. While they only went up against 2 really weak bots, this thing is crazy powerful. It's basically vertical Tombstone. It's huge. Not the bot huge. It's huge as in really big with a really massive vertical spinner. The reason it didn't knock out Nelly the Ellybot is because it knocked out Nelly the Ellybot, but it knocked out itself in the process. So, yeah. That'll probably happen a few more times later on with this thing. Bite Force. Yeah, they won this whole tournament again. Yeah, it's Bite Force. Sadly, this is the last time they would be seen. They have not returned as of right now. Hydra, the new flipper and the new king of flippers. They dethroned Bronco, and we don't see Bronco again, and we see Hydra on a reign of terror, basically for the rest of BattleBots so far. They made it to the top 16 and lost the Minotaur. Son of Waiachi. This is the last mainline season we'll see them in. We'll see them in the Bounty Hunter spin-off show, which we'll get to after World Championship 5. They did well. They beat Huge and Texas Twister and Kraken and Copperhead before losing to SawBlaze in the top 16. And number 1, Tombstone, just like last time. This is Tombstone at its best. Tombstone annihilated almost everyone it fought, except ROTATOR, which is a weird rematch where they still lost. And they lost to Bite Force in the top 4. Yeah, they made it to the top 4, which is better than they did last season. And they beat Lockjaw and SawBlaze, which are both really powerful. So, yeah. Tombstone's the number 1, just like last video. Anyways, that's the end of this one. Next is World Championship 5. Hope you guys enjoyed. Like and subscribe if you want. And I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.